Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker. It's a Monday evening, and I'm joined by Ash Sarkar. Ash, did you stay up for the Grammys?
Of course I did. And I looked through the script, and yet there's no mention of Kendrick Lamar winning 5 Grammys for Not Like Us, the first diss track to do so, and the first song which is basically just calling someone a nonce to win a Grammy. It's a historic event, and yet nothing from you.
I mean, it wasn't really an editorial decision because I was thinking of doing it. There was also Chapel Roan, wasn't there, talking about labor rights or a living wage, I think, for young artists. It was Kanye West sort of parading his naked girlfriend, which was all quite strange. But I think the Grammys are just a bit too hot on copyright. So I felt like we'd have to do it without any clips. I don't even know if we can buy the pictures. It was all too complicated. So we're keeping it simple, and we're talking about Donald Trump. Donald Trump and trade wars, what it means for, well, Mexico. They've now had a month-long pause. What it means for Canada, whether or not Keir Starmer has played a blinder. Seems like Donald Trump wants to put tariffs on everyone but us. At the end of the show, we will discuss an article which suggests that if Keir Starmer has played a blinder when it comes to Donald Trump, it might have been by accident because he's not really running the show anyway. We can't say we weren't warned.
To me, the most beautiful word, and I've said this for the last couple of weeks, in the dictionary today, is the word tariff. It's more beautiful than love. It's more beautiful than anything. It's the most beautiful word. This country can become rich with the proper use of tariffs.
So he wasn't exactly subtle. This is sort of one of those issues where you can say he didn't hide it from the electorate, right? He's just keeping to his word. And over the weekend, the US president did announce 25% tariffs on neighbors Mexico and Canada, and additional 10% tariffs on China. Trump explained the decision via his own platform, Truth Social. So he says, today I have implemented a 25% tariff on imports from Mexico and Canada, 10% on Canadian energy, because he doesn't want to raise those prices too much, and a 10% additional tariff on China, additional because there already are tariffs on China. This was done through the International Emergency Economic Powers Act because of the major threat of illegal aliens and deadly drugs killing our citizens, including fentanyl. We need to protect Americans, and it is my duty as president to ensure the safety of all. I made a promise on my campaign to stop the flood of illegal aliens and drugs from pouring across our borders, and Americans overwhelmingly voted in favor of it. So he's saying he's applying these tariffs because he's sick of irregular migrants and drugs pouring across the borders. I'm not sure if there's much to that. Tariffs, of course, are a tax on imports. They add costs to consumers. They also reduce competition, which is why they tend to be opposed by most mainstream economics. And immediately after the tariffs were announced, the Wall Street Journal accused Trump of starting what they called the dumbest trade war in history. Trump hit back, though, again on Truth Social, saying this: the tariff lobby headed by the globalist and always wrong Wall Street journalist is working hard to justify countries like Canada, Mexico, China, and too many others to name, continuing the decades-long rip-off of America, both with regard to trade, crime, and poisonous drugs that are allowed to so freely flow into America. Those days are over. The USA has major deficits with Canada, Mexico, and China, and almost all countries owes $36 trillion, and we're not going to be the stupid country anymore. Make your product in the USA and there are no tariffs. Why should the US lose trillions of dollars in subsidizing other countries? And why should these other countries pay a small fraction of the cost of what the USA citizens pay for drugs and pharmaceuticals, as an example? Then he says, all in caps, this will be a golden age of America. Will there be some pain? Yes, maybe, and maybe not. But we will make America great again, and it will all be worth the price that must be paid. We are a country that is now being run with common sense, and the results will be spectacular. So he's talking about, it might take some pain. Obviously, these tariffs will increase costs for American consumers, probably will do a lot of damage to American businesses that have integrated supply chains. With Canada, of course, the Mexico issue will park for one moment. Actually, let's go to the Mexican issue, because this is the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, who initially reacted with indignation.
This
measure of 25% tariffs has effects for both countries, but it has very serious effects for the economy of the United States, as it's going to greatly increase the cost of all products that are exported from Mexico to the United States. It's going to have 25% more cost. I also say that if they want to act, they should not set their sights on Mexico, but on their own country where they have done nothing to stop the illegal sale of fentanyl and other drugs.
So that was Claudia Sheinbaum saying, this isn't our problem. What are you talking about? It's your problem that you haven't managed to control drugs in your country. However, there was a slight change of tune this afternoon, and there was clearly some kind of breakthrough. So Claudia Sheinbaum says this, and we had a good conversation with Trump with great respect for our relationship and sovereignty. We reached a series of agreements. Mexico will immediately reinforce the northern border with 10,000 members of the National Guard to prevent drug trafficking from Mexico to the United States, particularly fentanyl. The United States is committed to working to prevent the trafficking of high-powered weapons to Mexico. Our teams will begin working today on two fronts, security and trade. They are pausing tariffs for 1 month from now. So the tariffs between America and Mexico paused for a month. Not clear what will happen at the end of that month, especially as, 10,000 troops on the border. It doesn't sound like it's going to do that much. It's a very, very long border. There has, of course, been no such breakthrough with the Canadians. Trudeau on Sunday announced retaliatory tariffs on the United States. And a spirit of economic nationalism is being channeled by the Liberal Prime Minister.
And now is also the time to choose Canada. There are many ways for you to do your part. It might mean checking the labels at the supermarket and picking Canadian-made products. It might mean opting for Canadian rye over Kentucky bourbon, or foregoing Florida orange juice altogether. It might mean changing your summer vacation plans to stay here in Canada and explore the many national and provincial parks, historical sites, and tourist destinations our great country has to offer.
The Canadian National Park, that does sound like quite a nice holiday, doesn't it? Trudeau is not alone as well in having adopted a fighting stance vis-a-vis Trump's America. The Premier of Ontario, which is Canada's most populous province, has banned American companies from state contracts. And this is interesting, he's ripped up a $100 million contract with Elon Musk's Starlink. There's been lots of talk about this. Can people use Trump's close relationship with Elon Musk as leverage? Obviously, Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, is trying to do just that. As for how the public are feeling, the BBC had one very interesting case study. And so it says, Monica Morelli, 39, you can see her picture there, from Montreal, Canada, has cancelled all her subscriptions to US companies, including Amazon and Netflix, as well as her planned holiday to New Orleans. She says Trump's repeated threats to Canada are nothing short of bullying. I've never felt more Canadian in my entire life. I live in Quebec, and for French Canadians to feel so Canadian is not something I felt in my lifetime, she tells the BBC, adding that when Trump confirmed the tariffs, something snapped. Morelli says jokes about Canada becoming a US state are no longer funny and that Trump is threatening our sovereignty. Do we need to get our gun licenses? Do we need to be ready in case we're called to fight, she says? There is something that has been irrevocably broken now after centuries of the US and Canada being allies. So you've got 39-year-old women saying we need to go to war with the United States, or potentially, we have to be ready for war with the United States, cancelling Amazon, Netflix, all over, and cancelling a trip to New Orleans. So it does, from social media, from what I'm looking at, it does seem like this sort of spirit of resistance to the United States from Canada is quite widespread. Very interesting. As for what Trump's obsession with trade wars could mean for people within the United States, this is a report from NBC.
Companies across the country bracing for tariffs, with a warning that it's the consumer that's going to pay the price.
It's everything that is at risk of becoming more expensive.
From Mexico, importers will now have to pay 25% more for items like fruits, vegetables, beer, liquor, and electronics. From Canada, 25% more for potatoes, grains, lumber, and steel. And from both, a big increase on pharmaceuticals and on auto parts. At S&S Automotive in Secaucus, New Jersey, more expensive imported parts means even pricier routine fixes.
Oil changes mainly. That'll be the first noticeable one. An average oil change on most vehicles now, anywhere between $50 to $80. It's probably going to end up over $100.
And that means that you got to raise the cost just to make sure that you can keep the lights on.
Right. And I don't like to do that because I've been in this town, like I said, 38 years. So most of my customers I know.
Experts believe it won't just be auto stores passing on the prices, but supermarkets as well.
So we could see upward pressure for meat prices, upward pressure for dairy prices. Those are the types of categories that directly hit consumers' wallets.
So obviously that clip was before the pause was agreed with Mexico. So some of those price increases will be less severe, or it will be only some of those products affected. And watching that, though, what's stuck out to me is that you've got a president who's ran against inflation, a Republican president, and the prices that are going to rise are on meat and cars. Like you kind of don't really get more Republican than meat and cars. And Donald Trump is in a position where he's threatening to increase all of those prices. Of course, there's a pause with the Mexicans that might not last more than a month. We don't know. And then with the Canadians, it still looks set to enter into reality. To get the latest on Trump's trade wars, I spoke earlier to Dean Baker. Dean is a senior economist and co-founder of the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington, D.C. And he's written numerous books, including Getting Back to Full Employment, A Better Bargain for Working People, and The End of Loser Liberalism, Making Markets Progressive. When I spoke to Dean, Trump had just confirmed tariffs against Mexico would be paused for a month. So I asked him if that meant we should consider Trump's tariffs as simply a threat to gain leverage as opposed to a genuine economic strategy.
I would say it was about a show. I mean, he could have called up Mexico's president and say, hey, can you put some more troops on the border? My guess is they would have had a little discussion. She probably would have said, fine. So I think this is just for show. He'll claim a big victory, but, again, he could have just called her up. Biden got tremendous cooperation from Mexico on immigration. This is just for show. So it's not leverage. That's being too generous. It was about show. Now, I don't know if that's the case with Canada, just to be clear, but I think that was the case with Mexico.
So you think with Mexico, it was maybe just for show? He could have asked her to put, what was it, a few thousand troops on the border
10,000
anyway.
troops, yeah. That's not going to stop the flow of fentanyl. They're already trying to stop the flow of fentanyl. It's not, it's not an easy thing to do. People who've worked on this issue for their whole lives would tell you that. 10,000 will not, will they get a few more shipments? Sure. Are they going to stop the flow? No. So, yeah, he could have called her up and said, hey, how about putting more troops on the border? They'd discuss it, and I'm sure she'd agree to it.
We know Trump likes to demonstrate strength. He likes to shock people. He doesn't mind if he's outraged a few people on the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, and he's sort of done that very effectively this weekend. I mean, he does also seem to be someone who does genuinely believe in tariffs in and of themselves, right? So do you think that there is also, a broader economic story here where Trump isn't just sort of trying to get attention? Like he really does want to impose tariffs on countries, and obviously the ones on Canada remain in place as we're speaking now.
It's really hard to tell with Trump because he says so many things that make no sense. So he talks about tariffs as though literally he puts a tariff on China or Canada, or whoever it might be, that they're going to send the Treasury the money. Now, does he believe that? I have no idea. I mean, it's a pretty crazy thought. It's a tax on our imports. So we could argue there's an economic argument. Okay, we put a 25% tariff on goods from Canada. Okay, so the exporter will swallow some portion of that, 1%, 2%. I mean, there's research on it, but that's an economic question. Canada is not sending us the money, but he talks about it as though they are. So does he believe that? I mean, it's kind of scary he does, but so I don't know. So when you're asking me, what does he really think? I have no idea because it clearly makes no sense.
As far as I understand it, there is an argument. So he thinks that there are countries that are taking advantage of America by exporting their goods to America, but not importing enough from America. So he's saying, I mean, Germany would be the classic example here. Lots of people have complained about Germany for this, and China as well, actually, where they say these countries have focused on exports, and they're not sort of, reciprocating in a way. They're not allowing demand to be pumped up in their own countries. And that means that, they're not benefiting, well, in this case, American businesses by importing from them. Is there anything to that at all?
There's a little something to it, but not a hell of a lot. I mean, basically, with Canada, it's kind of a joke because if you pull out their oil exports to the U.S., they actually have a trade deficit. So we're upset about them selling us oil. Trump in his first administration, they were really big on connecting up this Keystone pipeline, make it easier for Canada to ship oil to the U.S. So is that what we're angry at them about? That doesn't make a lot of sense. China, Germany, these are more complicated stories in the sense that you could say there is some negative aspect to that, but of course it's a mixed story. So it means we're getting goods cheaper than we otherwise would. Could we create demand in our own economy, even though we have a trade deficit with China, with Germany and many other countries? Of course we can, and we do that. The Federal Reserve Board was raising interest rates until the fall because they thought we had too much demand in the economy. So you could raise issues and say maybe it'd be better for the US, better for the world, and certainly better for people in China if they consume more domestically. And I would agree with that. But the idea that they've done us some horrible wrong because they sell us more than they buy from us, that really doesn't make a lot of sense.
The Mexico tariffs have been paused. Let's focus on the US-Canada tariffs for a moment and assume that they do stay in place, that this isn't just a sort of ploy to get Canada to agree to something on the border. This is sort of something which is intended to stay in place for a while. Where will the consequences of that be felt most severely?
Canada clearly is more dependent on its exports to us than we are on imports from Canada. So they're going to be hit harder. Now, what steps can they take? My guess, and we'll have to see, but my guess is they'll look to have closer ties to China because China could export just about anything they'll need. And that would be a big boom to their economy over the long run because China produces stuff much lower cost than we do. So having closer ties to China, long run might turn out to be a big benefit to them. But in the short term, yeah, they will be hit by that. They're businesses that are going to have a hard time, but it's going to be reciprocal. Again, it's a smaller hit in absolutes in proportion to our economy, but in absolute size, it's going to be very comparable. And economies in particularly the car producing states, Michigan in particular, Michigan, Ohio, be very hard hit because our industry is thoroughly integrated. Goods go back and forth between Canada and the United States, just like they go back and forth between Michigan and Ohio. So you will see a lot of people lose their jobs, a lot of disruptions in the U.S. economy as well. And again, I'm not being misleading anyone on this. It definitely is going to be larger in Canada. But if, let's say, 200,000 people lose their jobs in both countries, I kind of pulling a number out of the air, but let's say it's something like that. That's a big hit. But again, it's much bigger deal in a labor force of, let's say, 30 million. I guess probably closer to 20 million in Canada, as opposed to the U.S. with a labor force of 160 million.
A key issue in the election, and I think one of the reasons why many people thought Joe Biden lost and something that Donald Trump campaigned on was prices. Inflation had been very high. To what extent will these trade wars increase inflation and increase prices in America, and what could be the sort of political blowback from that?
Well, it's unambiguous. They will increase prices. I mean, there's no, we're taxing goods. They go up in price. So, it will increase prices. It's not going to be huge. We're not going to see a jump in inflation of a percentage point or anything, but, maybe 2-3 tenths of a percentage point. I think that's a very plausible number. And given that we already have some issues, we have the avian flu, which has shot egg prices literally through the roof. And we have some other factors that have been putting upward pressure on prices. So I think, from the standpoint of if we're concerned about inflation, this is definitely going the wrong way. It's not going to be huge, but it will possibly be big enough for people to notice it in their grocery shopping and buying different things. So I think it will be a noticeable impact.
Could you put this sort of in context of free trade in North America? Because obviously sort of free trade between countries is something that sort of has often been critiqued from the left. And now we're seeing this sort of right-wing president sort of radically upend the system. How do sort of Donald Trump's actions fit into sort of recent trade policies in North America, let's say?
Yeah, well, 2 points on that. One is what he's going back on is the deal he himself negotiated. So we had the U.S., Mexico, Canada, I'm forgetting the full initials, U.S.-Mexico trade agreement. I'm not getting exactly right. But anyhow, he negotiated this. He didn't like NAFTA, so he said he's renegotiating it. It wasn't hugely different. But in any case, he made a big deal out of it and said, now we have fair trade. Well, a few years later, he decides it's not fair trade. So it makes a mockery, not just of free trade, but the idea of coming to agreements with Donald Trump. They obviously don't mean anything. In terms of, the position, I was one of those on the left. I was very much opposed to NAFTA and then admitting China to the WTO because it was predictable. It was going to have a very negative effect on manufacturing. And it did. We lost millions of manufacturing jobs due to trade, and it wiped out communities. To my view, it was a really horrible story. But we're not going to get those back. So one of the important points I think people miss is that the manufacturing workforce is very different today than it was, say, 30 or 40 years ago. If you go back to 1980, 1/3 of the manufacturing workforce was unionized. Today, it's about 8%, compares to about 6% of the rest of the private economy. So if we get back manufacturing jobs, and I don't think it's likely we'll get back all that many no matter what Trump does, but if we get back some manufacturing jobs, there's no reason I think they'll be particularly good jobs. As someone pointed out, the jobs were good because of the unions, not because of the factories. So getting back factory jobs that aren't unionized, that's pretty much pointless in my view.
So you're saying pointless in the sense that they wouldn't be unionized, they wouldn't necessarily be good quality jobs. But I mean, is it even sort of aside from that, is it plausible that manufacturing jobs will come back to America, even if, say they're low quality manufacturing jobs? Is that something that could happen?
Well, if you put enough barriers to trade, sure. Again, I don't think there'll be that many. And again, another part of this story is that manufacturing is just a much smaller share of the workforce today than it was, say, 40 years ago. Back then, it was about 20%. Today, it's about 8%. So let's say we increase the number of manufacturing jobs by 10%, which would be a huge deal. That's, about 1 million jobs, a little more than that, in the labor force of 160 million. It has very little impact. So it would really be a Pyrrhic victory that, what's the point again? So it's possible you get some increase with big enough tariffs, big enough obstacles to trade, but the benefit from that is very hard to see.
In terms of how sort of businesses are responding, obviously sort of in Trump's first term, business seemed, at least publicly, lukewarm at best, let's say, towards him. They seem much more enthusiastic this time around. But actually, his economic policies also seem more disruptive this time around. I know the markets have sort of had a bit of a dip, but not a massive one. Could you talk about sort of how the actions we've seen over the past 48 hours or so have landed among American business people?
Businesses have been intimidated because he does threaten them. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg, I don't have any sympathy for Mark Zuckerberg particularly, but he literally threatened him being in jail for the rest of his life. Now, would he be able to? Would he try and prosecute him? Sure. Will he get him in jail? I have no idea, but he could find something to prosecute him on. So businesses have been intimidated, but I think most businesses recognize that this is not a good way to run an economy. You don't go around making threats about tariffs all over the place. It'd be really bad if you actually implemented them, but even if you don't, it's very disruptive. I was seeing that even with Mexico, even though they ended up with an agreement, they had trucks lined up for hours at the border because no one knew, what are they going to charge? Another part of this tariff issue hasn't gotten the attention it deserves. There's a de minimis exemption that if you bring in an amount, I think it's $800, it doesn't pay the tariff. He wants to get rid of that altogether. Now, you can make an argument, should it be 600, should it be 400, but that means every time someone sends a package from Mexico to the US or Canada, now I guess to the US, they're going to open it up, they're going to inspect it and figure out what's in it, and is it worth, whatever it's worth, they'll have to pay the 25% tariff. It's close to nuts. But, again, businesses recognize this is disruptive. Donald Trump's putting on a big show. So businesses are not fond of these actions. They might be reluctant to say that because they're worried Trump will punish them.
On the small packages point, I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding was that lots of governments are finding there is a bit of a problem with small packaging because of the model of Shein. So Shein being sort of like the Chinese clothes exporter, and they managed to keep their prices really, really low by delivering each item individually from China, and that means that they can avoid tariffs and taxes. Is he maybe, is there a sort of reasonable case for the applying tariffs to small packages as opposed to just large imports?
I'm not really concerned about this, but if you are, so if, say we have a policy, which we do, 20 U.S. Most goods from China pay a tariff of probably about 25%. I mean, it differs by goods, so I'd have to check that more closely. But let's just say it's 25%. And then you have these goods that get in no tariff because the de minimis exemption. Now, if I were sitting there trying to figure out how to do the policy, I would sit down with, the companies, Shin being the biggest, but I mean, others also benefit by that, and say, okay, how much business are you sending us? And we want you to make a payment of, X amount. You're you're selling, $1 billion a year. I have no idea what they actually sell. Let's say it's $1 billion, and our tariffs 25%. You have to pay $250 million on it. So that seems to me a way to do it. Are they going to give you the exact number? Are they going to, probably not? Maybe fudge it a little. Is it going to be in the ballpark? Well, we have pretty good ways of finding out roughly what they're selling. So that would seem a simple way to mostly get around that issue. But again, I haven't been working on it. Others have and spend a lot of time on it. But let me just put it this way. There are ways to get around that don't involve opening up every package and assessing the tariff on that package.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Finally, I'll be self-indulgent as we're speaking to you from the UK. Any predictions in terms of what might happen in terms of trade between the United States and, I suppose, the UK, and then separately the European Union?
Trump's going to come up with some crazy thing. Again, his complaints are almost invariably nonsense. I mean, with Canada and Mexico restricting the flow of fentanyl, it's not like they have some way they could turn off a button and no fentanyl is going to cross the border. So these were nonsense. So he'll come up with nonsense complaints against EU and UK. And my guess is they'll sell it the same way he did with Mexico, that they'll make some ostensible concession. That's basically what they're already doing, and it doesn't change.
Trump's trade war has so far affected China and North America, but Europeans do not look safe. He said this late last night.
We have over a $300 billion deficit. They don't take our cars. They don't take our farm products. They take almost nothing. And we take everything from them. Millions of cars, tremendous amounts of food and farm products. So the UK is way out of line, and we'll see the UK, but European Union is really out of line. UK is out of line, but I'm sure I think that one can be worked out. But the European Union it's an atrocity, what they've done. Well, Prime Minister Starmer has been very nice. We've had a couple of meetings. We've had numerous phone calls. We're getting along very well. And we'll see whether or not we can balance out our budget. With the European Union, it's $350 billion deficit. So obviously something's going to take place there.
So what he's talking about there is he's saying that the European Union has a trade surplus with the United States. So the Europeans export more to the United States than they import from the United States. The United Kingdom, we basically have balanced trade with the United States. So we import the same amount as we export, which means that he's more angry at Europe than he is at us. And he also added in there that, Keir Starmer's been quite nice to him. So maybe we're going to be okay. I think he did slip up and he sort of said, we're terrible. And then he was like, oh, actually, the European Union is terrible, but, we can sort it out with you guys. The European leaders, though, they seem like they're going to be next in line to feel Trump's wrath. Handily today, they were all in Brussels for a summit. And so there was ample chance for them to publicly respond to Trump's threats. Let's look at how some of those leaders have reacted. This was German Chancellor Olaf Scholz.
Of course, we will have intensive discussions about our cooperation with the United States. Both the US and Europe benefit from the trade of goods and services. If trade policies make this more difficult, it would be bad for the US and it would be bad for Europe. What is clear is that as a strong economic area, we can shape our own policies and respond to tariffs with our own tariffs. That is something we must and will do, but the goal should be to proceed in a way that ultimately leads to cooperation.
So Scholz does have a bit of a problem here because the EU, he's right, could impose tariffs on the Americans, but we have not we anymore because we're not in the European Union, but the Europeans have a trade surplus with the Americans. So tariffs will affect European exports more than they would American exports. In Germany, when people complain about people or countries, that have trade surpluses that are too large, which means that other countries have to have a deficit, or by definition, Germany is often top of the list, along with China. You might remember from the Eurozone crisis, the Greeks and Yanis Varoufakis, who I'm going to have on Wednesday's show, and were very critical of the fact that Germany was sort of, I suppose, telling everyone else that they were messing up their economies while not inflating their own economy so that the Germans would also maybe buy some stuff from Greece, right? Buy some stuff from Spain, buy some stuff from Italy. So many people saw the Germans as not really playing fair then. Is Trump calling their bluff now? I don't know. This was French President Emmanuel Macron.
It's simple. We think the priority is the strategic agenda and the security of our borders. If we are attacked on trade topics, as a power that holds, Europe has to make itself respected and react.
Has to make itself respected and react. So saying we can stand up to the guy. Now, there are lots of people that do think that Europe is in a pretty weak position here, right? It has relied for decades on the Americans for security, NATO. Last time Donald Trump was in power, he was asking them all to get to 2% of GDP when it came to funding their militaries. They didn't. Lots of people suggesting the EU isn't in a strong position here. Let's see if one more European leader has sort of something persuasive to say. This was EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas.
We were listening carefully to those words, and of course we are preparing also on our side. But what is clear, there are no winners in trade wars. If United States and the US start the trade war, then the one laughing on the side is China. We are very interlinked. We need America, and America needs us as well.
So that was European leaders or EU leaders attempting to present a united front. Meanwhile, Starmer was also in Brussels, the first time a British leader has met all of the EU leaders and attended a summit since Brexit. And in a press conference, he was asked about all of these trade issues. So let's see what he said.
And Prime Minister, would you be willing to water down your reset with the European Union in order to keep President Trump on side?
In relation to the relationship between the UK and the US and the EU, I've always been clear that both are important to us. Now, that for me isn't new. I think that's always been the case and will be the case for many, many years to come. That's why in my discussions with President Trump, we've touched on issues of trade and on issues of security, both really important in relation to the trade that we already do between our two countries, but also the security, the defence and the intelligence partnership that we've founded over many, many years, hugely important to our collective defence.
I think later in that press conference, he said, I don't think we need to choose between the European Union and the United States. Ash, this does seem like a situation where, we're actually in a better position than the Europeans. Are you feeling relaxed, smug even?
Well, look, the thing about Donald Trump is that he is notoriously volatile, but also ego is important. I think that there is something at play here, which is more than just about trade deficits, which is also about feeling like, okay, I'm going to put these whiny liberal heads of government in their place, whether that's Trudeau, Macron, or Scholz. There was something quite funny about the way Trump phrased it, which is like, Prime Minister Starmer, he's been very nice to me. He's been very nice to me. Beautiful pictures of the soles of his feet. So gorgeous. Toes all splayed. I think that there is certainly a sense that because, to a greater extent, because we're no longer part of a large trading bloc, i.e. the EU, that the UK has accepted its place as a sort of, client state to the United States and accepted the sort of apex predator status of Donald Trump's government. The thing is, though, there are still some areas of vulnerability. One, like I said, Donald Trump, notoriously volatile. The second thing is that the bulk of the UK's exports to the United States, it's not in the form of goods, it's in the form of services. Now, tariffs traditionally don't get slapped on services. If, however, there was a sort of blanket tariff imposed on the UK, which affected services, we'd be in a spectacularly weak position. That there is the risk that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves' growth plans will already be facing threats from the UK being caught in the middle of a trade war, or still the sort of spectre, or the sword of Damocles of tariffs hovering over the government. Tariffs, or even the threat of tariffs imposed by the US, have an impact on the bond market. Increased gilt yields, higher gilt yields mean that the cost of borrowing goes up. Rachel Reeves has already been in trouble with that. That's already threatened her spending plans. And it could also impact the value of the FTSE 100. Now, if you're a government who's bet the house on growth, it is absolutely number one priority to not get blanket tariffs, particularly on services, slapped on UK exports to the US. God knows what it is that will be given up in what kind of acquiescence will be necessary to keep ourselves tariff free. But it does seem that the German economic model is really in trouble here with the specter of tariffs. I don't know what other options they have. Maybe they've got to preemptively invade Greenland and take it before Trump does. But I don't think you can underestimate the scale of the threat.
I suppose they could do that just to have it as a sort of card in negotiations. Couldn't that be interesting? Lots of people in the comments very impressed by your Trump impression. I think you've been working on it. You're definitely improving every time I hear it. I'm jealous. I have made no such improvements. Ed Davey today, so the Lib Dem leader, said that Keir Starmer should be sort of more vocally standing in solidarity with the Canadians. He should have a sort of Commonwealth summit saying Canada has the same head of state as us. We should be standing side by side with them. And I suppose, there will be an idea among many people that sort of Trump is trying to pick off countries one by one, and maybe they should stand united and say, we're not going to take this. Should sort of Keir Starmer sort of join some sort of resistance against Trump, or do you think he's playing a smart move by sort of saying, look, I'm not going to get involved. I don't think we need to join this battle. We're going to sit this one out.
One of the problems with the EU position is that let's look at the material vulnerabilities there. You could say, okay, well, we should stick together. We should say we're not going to be picked off one by one. The problem is that with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the impact of the fact that Russia's energy exports are no longer welcome in European markets, what that's done domestically to the price of fossil fuels in the EU, it precipitated an inflationary crisis, which, brought down 14 years of conservative governments here in the UK. I mean, it's had a hugely disruptive political effect across the EU as well. America is a net energy exporter. When it comes to our need for American goods, sure, don't need the cars, don't need a Chevrolet that's the size of, most people's houses, but increasingly dependent on American energy exports. So there's some real, issues here of material disadvantage. Another is, the Eurozone's embrace of austerity programs, Italy, Greece, of course, being the most notorious ones, but much more broadly as well. We've got quite poor population. So if the idea is, okay, well, what we're going to do is make up for the loss of the Americans importing our goods with our own domestic markets, well, you've made them really poor. You've made them really, really poor, and completely hamstrung your own population spending power. What other growing markets do you have? Okay, you've got China. I mean, we certainly don't have a trade surplus with China. I don't think that any EU country does. It would be very, very difficult to overturn that. Or perhaps India, right? India is maybe your only other option. But yeah, so there are some real material disadvantages that Europe is at. Even if you say, okay, well, everyone's going to club together. Oh, we're going to join up with Trudeau. I don't think that quite makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to I can't see Keir Starmer changing his strategy. Although I'm not sure how well he'd deal if, Donald Trump did turn around and slap some tariffs on us. Because obviously Elon Musk is, very close to Donald Trump, seems to have some influence over the guy. And his sort of number one enemy in the West seems to be Keir Starmer. So, yeah, I wouldn't be faithful that this is not going to turn out badly for us as well. Who knows? Although I suppose as we don't export so much to America, maybe our weakness is our strength. We don't export anything anyway. So what can you do to us? We're already pretty useless. So what can you do? I suppose you're right. Services. I mean, apparently financial services, the law, stuff like that. Maybe we export, but you can't sort of damage our car industry because we don't have one. We don't make steel anymore. The Sunday Times has published a damning piece of reportage about Keir Starmer. It's titled Keir Starmer's Not Driving the Train, Confessions of His Inner Circle. It's an extract, in fact, from a new book by Patrick Maguire and Gabriel Pogrund. It paints a picture of an ambitious and vain, but politically vacuous figure who aspired to become Prime Minister more for the prestige than to pursue any specific political agenda. Now, most explosively, the authors suggest Keir Starmer is not really running the country. Here's a quote from the book about how Starmer is viewed by his own aides. So Morgan McSweeney, the most key aides, or the most important aide, let's say, Morgan McSweeney and his acolytes saw themselves as insurgents within the Labour Party. As long as Starmer's private office was functional, they could control the party's politics themselves without interference from small-minded Westminster villagers. They knew that Starmer's real life, his true self, was not the work they shared with him. Their political project was predicated on this unpolitical leader doing as he was told. In his weaker moments, even McSweeney would confide to friends that he knew neither what Starmer thought nor whose advice he had taken. Occasionally, they even spoke of their leader as if he were a useful idiot, said one, referring to the driverless Docklands light railway that wound its way through East London. Keir's not driving the train. He thinks he's driving the train, but we've sat him at the front of the DLR. So, Ash, you never know with because it's always, they'll never tell you who said what when they write these books. It would be, if it was Morgan McSweeney that said that would be kind of stupid, right? Because his success is very much sort of dependent on Keir Starmer doing well. And that's a really damning thing to say about the guy. But they said, we've sat him at the front of the DLR, so he thinks he's driving the train, but actually it's the driverless train. We're running the show. How problematic is this for Keir Starmer?
It's not uncommon in politics for the figurehead and the strategist to be two different individuals. So Margaret Thatcher, you had Keith Joseph, the person who's the most effective public face of a political project. They're not always the person drawing up the policy agenda. That's normal. I think one of the things about Keir Starmer, which isn't so normal, is that I think that Margaret Thatcher, obviously, don't rate her politically at all. I think that she had a theory of change and she was a sort of compelling public presence, shall we say. Whereas Keir Starmer is sort of uniquely quite vacuous. And I think you could see it quite early on in his leadership of the Labour Party. Personally, I'll never forget him taking the knee in solidarity with BLM protesters in an empty conference room, sort of gazing into nothing. And that's the man through and through. I think you can tell where his interest lies when it comes to the act of governance. He's not particularly interested in domestic politics, not particularly interested in the economy. What he likes is flying around for conferences and junkets and standing up on a lectern surrounded by other heads of government. I think it's something which appeals to his ego. It makes him feel important. Whenever there's a prime ministerial trip, particularly to Washington, and then there's the sort of lobby shot of the journalists surrounding the prime minister on the plane. I bet Keir Starmer loves that kind of thing. I don't think he's actually that interested in the political project itself. And one thing that I heard from a senior Labour source was that in 2015, when Keir Starmer was but a newly minted MP, still wet behind the ears, he was already confiding privately to people that he wanted to go for the leadership. Now, that's not a man who's got a strong political vision, a strong sense of what he wants to do. He just likes power for power's sake. It's ego and it's status.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it, as well? Because I suppose when Boris Johnson was a bit like that as well, didn't really have any strong beliefs. David Cameron was a bit like that. But I suppose with both of those two, they seemed to enjoy being in front of the camera, right? They were kind of the PR people. They were sort of the personality, and the policy was made somewhere else. So with David Cameron, it was George Osborne, who was really the policy guy. With Boris Johnson, it was kind of whoever was willing to do it. But Keir Starmer, what's he getting out of it? If he doesn't have a political project, and he seems, he doesn't seem happy when he's in front of a camera. He seems like he's having a dreadful time when he's being interviewed. I suppose he likes the feeling of being in Downing Street. And I suppose you said he does seem to like meeting world leaders, which I suppose would be quite interesting. Is he just doing it because he finds it interesting, Ash?
I don't know. He doesn't seem to be someone who's also really interested in global politics either. I think he's someone who likes to feel important. I don't want to say too much because I'll get in trouble. But all I'm saying is I think everyone has somebody in their family who loves status. And you can recognize them from a mile away. They love puffing up their chest and they love being the person who's the most successful person in their family. And there's a big degree of ego there. I'm just saying we recognize the personality type.
Well, I think the more explosive thing is one person in every family, Ash. I've met most of your immediate family. They all seemed quite humble people. So I suppose I wonder who that leaves out. No, you're a humble person as well. There's one more part of the article which centres on the days in 2021 after Labour lost the Hartlepool by-election. That was when Starmer tried and failed to demote Angela Rayner. And this is from the article. Rayner, still smarting, later texted one confidant to remark that she did not know who ran the Labour Party. It could not be Starmer, she said, because he was incapable of running a bath. Never mind the opposition. This is the kind of thing that you can see why someone would brief that to the Times, because it makes Rayner sound kind of powerful. It makes Starmer sound like an idiot. Rayner apparently sent that message after Starmer aides persuaded her to abandon a coup she'd been plotting in 2021 after she was sacked as party chair. Owen Jones has published an article corroborating some of the claims made in that extract. So he says Angela Rayner and her team definitely were plotting to overthrow Starmer. And he also confirms that Starmer used to contact him to complain about being criticised. So Owen says, he got in touch with me repeatedly about my criticisms, both in my Guardian column, but also tweets. He is just very thin-skinned. This was manipulated by the Labour right because as Starmer violated both the letter and spirit of his leadership campaign platform, that caused ever-growing outrage from the left, which the Labour right offered as evidence for why he should crack down even harder on them. I suppose what we should discuss now, Ash, is not so much, who Starmer is, but what the implications of that are. Do you think the fact that he seems a bit vacuous politically means that sort of his leadership is always doomed to failure? Does it mean that there's a degree of unpredictability? Because if he falls out with Morgan McSweeney, he might suddenly side with some left-wingers instead. What's the significance of having a somewhat hollow prime minister?
Look, I don't think that Morgan Sweeney is going to, emerge as a friend of the left anytime soon. What his political mentor is Peter Mandelson. That gives you a sense of the man's ideological affiliations. However, having a, weak, vacuous character at the heart of your political project, it does run the risk that at some point journalists are going to start magically noticing all the things that they conveniently overlooked for the past few years. I mean, we saw that with Theresa May, and it was really quite astonishing. Before the 2017 snap election, she was constantly being presented in the media as this very powerful, draconian, hard-nosed figure flanked by police officers. You very rarely saw her without those police officers. Suddenly, after the loss of her authority within the Conservative Party, losing her majority within Parliament, she was, presented as, weak and brittle and pathetic and besieged. Now, part of that was a reflection of political reality. You had this mutinous Conservative Party, but also it was this sense that the press were happy to tell one story when everyone else was telling it. When everyone else is telling a different story, the press goes along with that. Ditto Boris Johnson. I mean, it's not news to anyone that he's someone who thought that the rules did not apply to him. He's someone with a track record of dishonesty in every, professional office that he's ever held, magically overlooked until suddenly everyone started noticing. This is around 2020, 2021. Rishi Sunak, super Rishi, eat out to help out Rishi Sunak. Oh, wait, we've all noticed that he's technocratic and a bit tetchy. This is the pattern of the press, which is, in the words of Boris Johnson, when the herd moves, it moves. Now, if Keir Starmer already has so many people close to him in his, proximate to his inner circle, talking so much shit about him now, when, sure, Labour aren't doing well in the polls, but it's not even been a year since their general election win. They've still got a powerful parliamentary majority. There isn't a political threat which, is destabilizing them in any way. Of course, they're doing badly in the polls. If this is how people are talking about him now, just think how it's going to be in a year or two's time. I mean, really.
All right, we've got 7 minutes left. I didn't script a Grammys section, but let's do quick fire. Ash, did Cowboy Carter deserve Best Album?
No, it didn't. And I say this as a Beyonce stan. I think that Beyonce should have won Album of the Year for Self-Titled, which changed the game in terms of music releases. Lemonade, a confessional masterpiece. Maybe Renaissance, but I'm less keen on it. But not Cowboy Carter. It should have been Chapel Roan or Brat, even though I don't particularly like Brat.
Yeah, I don't particularly like Brat. My partner is obsessed with it. And actually, I did go to see her at the O2 and it was very fun. But I kind of don't quite get all of the hype about it. Should the Grammys be rewarding diss tracks, which some might say is sort of the lowest form of art?
The lowest form of art, Michael. How dare you? You've really riled me up now. Diss tracks are an integral part of hip hop. Now, when the art form is good, it's great. Not every diss track has to be super serious. Mr. Me Too. I mean, that's quite funny. Obviously, with Biggie and Tupac, you had Hit 'Em Up, which was an absolutely blisteringly aggressive track by Tupac. It ended with both of their deaths. It was horrible. That's not how Nas Jay-Z ended. Pusha T, again, like the incredible story of Adidon, like amazing hip hop storytelling, coupled with this like knife under the ribs reveal of Drake having a secret son. Not Like Us was incredible, and I'm gonna talk about this for a couple of minutes. I'm so sorry if this is not why you subscribe to Novara Media, but in sickness and in health, and this is my sickness. The reason why Not Like Us was incredible was because it was about collective identity. It was about repping for the West Coast. It was about Los Angeles. Now, I am not from LA. I have never been to LA, but there is something about that feeling, that sense of you have disrespected us as a people and a place, and we're not going to let that happen, which is so compelling and so important and integral to hip hop as a culture. Like in the UK, I'd call it like repping the ends, but in the US, it's about, representing your city. I think it's an incredible track. I also think Kendrick Lamar was robbed in 2012. He should have won the Grammy for Best Rap Album for Good Kid, Mad City, which is, I think, one of the greatest rap albums of all time. I know that there's someone in the comments who didn't like Kendrick Lamar very much, but then just said, okay, well, I like him if you like him. Just do me a favor and listen to Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst. I think it's one of the most incredible songs ever written. Incredible way of channeling different people's voices. And that's why I love Kendrick Lamar. I wrote my master's thesis about Kendrick Lamar, Michael. I don't know if you knew this about me, but I'm an obsessive.
I didn't know that. I also love Good Kid, Mad City. That's probably another one where it's like, maybe they'll give, has he won Album of the Year for like an album that's not as good, but because they feel like because I think that's what happened with Beyonce, right? They felt like she deserves an Album of the Year. There are no other exceptional albums this year, so let's just give it to Beyonce for her album, which was kind of fine.
I don't think they did the sort of like reparatory Grammy thing for Kendrick, but he did win a Pulitzer Prize for his album Damn.
Okay, a final question. Why was Jaden Smith, why did he have a house on his head? Because I haven't researched that. I just keep seeing the image. I don't know do you know why?
I've got no idea. I mean, they just wanted attention, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like there must have been something else going on there. Who knows? Let's wrap it up. Unless you've got any final sort of really strongly held opinions about the Grammys or anything else before we go?
Oh, I've got so many strongly held opinions, but for tonight, I'm done.
For brevity's sake, we'll leave it there. Ash, it's been an absolute pleasure, as always, being joined by you
for
this
having
evening.
me.
Let's wrap up there. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll be back tomorrow for another show at 6 p.m. I should say, we did say at the end of Friday's show we were going to have a Q&A tonight. For practical reasons, we haven't been able to do that, but we will do it on Friday instead. Until then, or until tomorrow, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.